We left off last class talking about how Wollstonecraft thinks that citizenship has both private and public aspects, and put the ironic quotes around public and private anytime you're discussing those terms in the context of Wollstonecraft. So we saw that Wollstonecraft thinks citizenship, of course, includes public roles like voter or marcher or politician. But Wollstonecraft also thinks that citizenship has this private side to it, the side that belongs properly. Sorry about this. Fire truck going by. An aspect of citizenship that properly belongs to the household. Wollstonecraft talked about being a good mother as being a good citizen, being a good father as being a good citizen, being a good sister as being a good citizen, being a good brother as being a good citizen. Okay, so we see here that citizenship is supposed to stretch across this standard or typical divide between public and private life. And corresponding to this idea is Wollstonecraft's idea that education too must stretch across this divide of public and private life. Why does it have to stretch in this manner? Well, because Wollstonecraft thinks that education needs to promote good citizenship. For Wollstonecraft, job training is important. It's definitely a part of education. But what she really stresses is the moral side of education. So another way of putting it is, for Wollstonecraft, education is less about the technical skills or the job training you would get at school, for example, and more about shaping the character of the student and preparing them to be a citizen in both public and private life. What's the problem? Well, the problem in a nutshell is current educational practices don't promote good citizenship. There are a couple problems. The first problem is education, for the most part, is limited to men, in the same way that citizenship is currently limited to men. And the idea there, the ideology of this way of putting society together is that citizenship is this thing you do out in public, and only men should be out in public, and that's why only men need to be educated. Okay, so that's part of the problem. And then the other part of the problem is education is not widely and publicly available. It's mostly private. It's mostly private. So if you're an educated person in Wollstonecraft's time, you probably had a privately funded education. For example, at a boarding school where if you were a young boy, you got sent away to live at this school, and there was a headmaster, and you had servants cleaning up your room. Wollstonecraft thinks this is bad, mostly because, the students from these families that are extremely rich, they kind of tyrannized over the headmaster. They didn't learn proper respect for authorities. They were always up to these mischievous tricks, tormenting the servants and so forth. And she thought you were basically learning how to be a young lord over there and lord over other people. It's not good. It's not well suited towards training people, teaching people to be equals. Okay, so that's one problem. Boarding schools. Another problem would have been this arrangement whereby, say, the father of a household that could afford it, hires a private tutor. And the tutor comes and teaches the young boy, and maybe if there's time left over, you can teach the young girl too, but mostly teach the young boy. And this young boy stays in the house. Maybe there's a study or a room where the schooling happens, but they stay in the house and they don't ever leave the household to receive their education. And the problem with that, according to Wollstonecraft, is it doesn't do the job of transitioning the young student or the young adult between the private and the public spheres, which is what Wollstonecraft, as we'll remember, thinks education actually needs to do. School is supposed to be in between the household and the broader world, and if it's just homeschooling, it can't do that job that well. So, what is Wollstonecraft's proposal? Wollstonecraft's proposal is education needs to be continuous across the private and the public spheres. And the ideal arrangement, according to Wollstonecraft, is something like have national schools, publicly funded schools, schools funded by the government that every citizen can go to. Now, this kind of arrangement with basically free, as in taxpayer-funded schools, this didn't come about in Wollstonecraft's own country for most students until about the 20th century, and something similar could be said about the United States. Okay, so teachers will educate at these national schools, and this should be seen as a continuation of what the parents are doing less formally at home. So the parents themselves would be educated. Maybe they will have been to one of these national schools when they were a kid, and the parents will be able to informally educate, as in socialize their kids while at home because they themselves have been educated. Okay, so that's how it's continuous. But Wollstonecraft also thinks that there will be a kind of educational division of labor. Sorry, that should not say pubic. The word there should be public. Sorry for that typo. I'm not trying to be funny. That's public-private education. Okay. The public-private education is supposed to cultivate public reason at school and cultivate private affections at home. So at school, Wollstonecraft says, the young boys and young girls will be able to reason together. They'll be able to do, in today's term, group activities, group projects. They'll have discussions with one another. Okay, all that. So the idea is you can't just use your reason in isolation. You've got to use your reason with other people. In other words, you've got to talk to people. And you've got to work on problems, intellectual problems, math problems, science problems. Who knows what other problems? Together, okay? Do some homework together. And that's what the national school is the best place for. At the same time, you've got to work on private affections. You've got to learn about how to care for one another. You've got to have good relations between parents and children, for example. This is one of the things, it's the ties of private affection. Wollstonecraft thinks that boarding schools tend to sever because the kids are away for most of the year and then they come back having grown up a lot in the school, and the parents and the children barely recognize each other. Okay, so private affections, these can be cultivated best in the informal education that these kids will receive at home. And so the idea is this public-private education will combine the best of both worlds, both public and private, both reasons and passions. Okay, so don't be confused about what Wollstonecraft is saying, though. She still thinks that formal education, the kind of education you receive at school, has a lot of informal dimensions of socialization, habituation, of working on the emotions, of working on the whole personality, kind of like this holistic education idea. Okay, these were pretty standard among the progressive educators of Wollstonecraft's time. As we know, these religious dissenters made education central, especially religious education, central to their understanding of how you shape a good character, how you cultivate the soul, and so forth. Okay, so what Wollstonecraft is saying is, look, formal education is going to get you ready for life in this broader public world, this world of politics and employment. This education process as a whole is going to get kids ready for work life. And this is where the job training stuff kicks in. So you can see Wollstonecraft saying on page 210 of your Penguin edition that, okay, everybody should have this common education. Let's say reading, writing, and arithmetic. Age 1, sorry, not age 1. Whenever they get into school, let's say 5 to 8. Okay, and then Wollstonecraft says, after the age of 9, okay, so let's say 5 to 9. After the age of 9, girls and boys intended for domestic employment or mechanical arts ought to be removed to other schools and receive education in some measure appropriate to the destination of each individual. The sexes being still together in the morning, but in the afternoon, the girls should attend a school where plain work, mantua making, that's gown making, and millinery, that's hat making, would be their employment. So the idea is everybody's in the same classroom till age 10 or so. At age 10, you can now start being tracked. And yes, some of this tracking has to do with ability, but yes, also some of this tracking has to do with class, and yes, some of this tracking has to do with sex. And the idea is what's common for all these young citizens is the basics. And then, of course, you have to make some concession to practicality. You have to make some concessions for job training, and that's where these various tracks will kick in. So you're preparing students for work life. You're also preparing students for associational life more broadly. You've got to work on the entire personality. You have to have this holistic approach, to use today's buzzwords. And for Wollstonecraft, holistic approach means you work on the whole personality, which includes both reason and passions. Okay, so Wollstonecraft is saying if there's a disciplinary problem, everyone's age 7 or 8, so they're all together, boys together with girls, rich together with poor, it's public education, everyone's kind of on the same level, so they're all peers and equals. And if in this context there's a disciplinary problem, why wouldn't you let these peers and equals handle it themselves? Do you have to have the teacher come in and, use corporal punishment, hit their hand with a ruler, or force that kid to sit in the corner as a punishment or something like that? Why not have the kids, for example, okay, let's say one kid does something wrong, starts bullying another kid. Why not have the kid who's being bullied and the kid who's a bully? Why don't they have more or less a trial? And why don't you have some kids in the prosecution, defense, and others serving on this jury of their peers? Wouldn't that be a great training for adult life? Because you're using not only your reason together, but you're also working on your passions together, because you're trying to calm things down and figure out what the just thing to do is. Maybe that includes punishment, maybe it doesn't. But wouldn't that be good training for adult life, for adult associational life? And along these lines, Wollstonecraft says, wouldn't school, co-ed school, co-educational school, school with both boys and girls, actually be great training for more equal marriages later on in life? And Wollstonecraft is thinking, you can't sex segregate boys and girls for their entire lives, and then when they reach adulthood say, oh, by the way, you should be equals. By the way, men and women are equals. By the way, you're now going to have to interact with each other by the way, here's adult life. You haven't even prepared boys and girls, or these young adults, these young men and women, to interact with each other as equals. And Wollstonecraft is saying it's the coeducational setting of the school where boys and girls will really be able to see, oh yeah, we all have the same kind of reason. Oh yeah, we all have the same kinds of souls. Oh yeah, we've been serving on these student juries as peers and equals. Oh yeah, we can continue doing this kind of thing, having equality between the sexes in later life. And so Wollstonecraft says, okay, these schools might not only train people to be equals, they may actually help these students learn what they like and dislike about other people, and get them prepared to make good marriage matches later in life. To see who they can really have a long-term partnership and a long-term friendship with on terms of equality.